As well as comics, Ratchet & Clank have also appeared on mobile devices. The first was in 2005, in a mobile phone exclusive game called Going Mobile. The reason you've probably never heard of this one is because it's actually pretty tricky to track down these days. It was released for specific mobiles with number pads, so you can't even buy it these days. The only way to actually play it is through emulation, and that's a legal grey area that I could not possibly condone. Taking place shortly after Up Your Arsenal, also the Ratchet & Clank wiki tells me, this is a 2D platformer that basically doesn't have a plot. Ratchet & Clank are sucked into some electronic device and have to make their way through a bunch more in an attempt to escape back to the real world. That's your lot. It's basically an excuse to explain why the game plays so differently to the rest of the series and why you're travelling through various Super Clank big comics and stuff. Considering the restrictions I had to deal with, it's surprising just how much of the traditional Ratchet & Clank experience this game has. Not only do you have several weapons in the series, but they also level up in the same way as the other games that you wouldn't expect at all from such a basic title. There's also hidden bolts to collect, a rhino to unlock, and skill points to earn, which is really going above and beyond. Where the game stumbles is in the gameplay, but even then it's not exactly terrible. It's a fair bit slower than your average Ratchet & Clank game, mostly to compensate for the awkward control scheme. This was on old school phones, remember, so quick button presses just weren't going to be a thing. If you've never used a phone with a keypad, then it's a bit like playing a 2D platformer with nothing but the number pad part of your keyboard, so give that a go sometime and you'll see how awkward it is. And yet, despite this, the game still manages to remain fun, which is a testament to how well made it is. The only other thing really worth mentioning is the music, or rather the lack of it, since aside from the title screen, there's barely any sound whatsoever. It's a bit distracting, but then again, it's a mobile game, so I doubt anyone had the sound turned on anyway, unless they annoy everyone around them. Overall, this is a game that's far better than it has any right to be. What could have been a cheap cash-in is actually a surprisingly solid little platformer. It's not the most in-depth game, nor is it the longest, but for what it is, I enjoyed it far more than I thought I would. That wasn't the only mobile outing for the pair, however. Much more recently, they were in a free-to-play endless runner for mobiles and tablets called Before the Nexus, which, as you might have guessed, is a prequel-cum-tie-in-cum-advert for the pair's final PS3 outing, Into the Nexus. Again, there's basically no plot here. Some bad guys shoot at Ratchet, so you endlessly chase after them until you die. I'm pretty sure that last bit isn't canon, but the game goes on forever until you do, so who knows. The game is a lot like other endless runners, such as Subway Surfers. You can switch between 3 separate lanes by swiping the screen left and right, or jump over obstacles by swiping up. But the main difference is that you have guns with which to shoot bad guys whenever they appear. It's basic and functional, but not much more. Gameplay is divided into 3 different sections: grind rails, combat areas, and boss battles, and it alternates between those in a 1-2-1-3 pattern that loops over and over until you die. It really doesn't take long for you to notice this pattern, and once you do, it'll start getting old quick. The grind rails are a recurring element in Ratchet & Clank games, and are almost tailor-made for an endless runner. They're your basic dodge the obstacle type of thing, and they work relatively well, though it doesn't take long for them to get rather boring. They're nowhere near as dynamic or interesting as they are in the rest of the series, so yeah, it's all very standard. The combat areas have Clank acting as a hover pack, gliding you through either a bizarrely out-of-place garden or a more fitting series of corridors, as you shoot enemies that increase in number the longer your current run through the game is. These aren't too challenging, provided you have the right weapon, but the sheer number of enemies on screen can mean you sometimes can't see a projectile in time to avoid it, which is rather frustrating. Finally, there's the boss battles, which featured the return of the guys who shot at you in the beginning as they fire a laser at the ground that covers 2 lanes, forcing you to either move into the clear lane or just jump over the thing. This really isn't difficult at all, so it's no surprise that there's actually more to it. If you can manage to destroy the bad guys before the section ends, you'll earn a bonus, though you won't do this until you've fully upgraded your weapons, and even then, it's a challenge. Speaking of weapons, you start off with a basic pistol but can get your hands on 4 more. The shotgun, great for combat areas, buzz blades, fires distracting blades of dubious effectiveness, and the predator launcher, rockets that need to lock on and are therefore useless. There's also the series mainstay Rhino, but you can't buy that one. Instead, you need to find 10 collectibles that randomly appear throughout the game. But once you've got it, you'll probably use nothing else, since it makes combat absolutely trivial. You can also purchase armor that lets you take additional hits and are outrageously expensive, and unlock gadgets that can temporarily let you take more hits, make all the enemies dance, or make all the bolts you'll be collecting throughout the game come flying towards you, though you'll need to collect these whenever they appear during gameplay before you can actually use them. Those bolts I mentioned are the game's only real currency, and are scattered throughout the game, or purchased with real money. It is a free-to-play mobile game after all. But once you've bought everything you can, and upgraded everything, because they don't upgrade through experience in this game, you need to buy upgrades with bolts, there's not a whole lot to do in this game. Or rather, there wouldn't be if not for the game's sneaky main reason to keep you playing: Raritanium, which is another rare collectible that serves absolutely no purpose in this game. So why collect it? Because you can transfer your Raritanium to Into the Nexus, where it's used to upgrade your weapons. And that really is the only real reason to keep playing this game, to let you get a massive leg up in a completely different game altogether. Before the Nexus isn't that bad a game, unless you're talking about the visuals, because those aren't exactly great, as I'm sure you could tell, but it's also not really going to keep people's attention for long. Unlike other endless runners, there's very little to work towards. Subway Surfers, for example, has absolutely loads of things to unlock and reasons to keep playing. Before the Nexus has skill points and achievements, none of which are all that exciting. Achievements are exactly what you'd think. Achieve a set goal, like collect 20 Raritanium or fully upgrade a weapon. These aren't too difficult, but they'll take some time to get. Skill points, on the other hand, are easier to achieve challenges like stay in the right lane for 200 meters, or use the Groovatron 3 times in one run. You get randomly assigned 3 of these when you first start the game, and once you achieve them, they only change when you start a new run. Neither of these, however, are enough to keep you playing, because they don't unlock anything worthwhile. Getting an achievement nets you some bonus Raritanium that you won't care about, because you also get Raritanium every time you beat the boss, and that's a piece of cake with the Rhino. While skill points just give you 500 bolts when you achieve one, which is nice, but hardly essential. And that's all there is. There's no unlockable characters, no new skins, no different locations, it's just the same thing over and over. And while it's certainly not terrible, you'll end up getting bored of it pretty quickly. The only real consolation is that it's free, but even then, there's plenty of similar games out there that offer way more for the same price. It's worth a look, especially if you happen to be a fan of the franchise, but don't expect much.